Right, welcome and thank you once again for staying with us here on KTN Prime. In less than 72 hours, National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani will be presenting the largest budget yet. The 2021-2022 budget is not only expected to navigate the country through the tough COVID-19 period, but also cement the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta in his last term in office. With just about 13 months to go, will allocations to critical sectors help cement or wipe out President Uhuru Kenyatta's economic legacy? Joining me at this hour is Professor XN Iraki, an economist, just speaks to us on President Uhuru Kenyatta's economic options as we break down some of the key highlights of the budget. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us. And before we get into that conversation, let's quickly take a look at some of the highlights. Important numbers to note, even as we stay tuned for that Thursday afternoon address by Ambassador Ukur Yatani, who's the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary. Of course, we are talking about a total budget of 3.63 trillion, the largest yet in the history of the country. And the national government will be receiving 1.93 trillion, the lion's share, really. The executive getting 1.88 trillion, Parliament getting 37.88 billion shillings under, of course, that, and judiciary has been allocated 17.92 billion in the proposals factored in the finance bill of 2021 rather, and consolidated funds 1.33 trillion, and county governments 410 billion, an increase to the monies going to the county government, and we will be slightly talking about that as well. Let's now take a look at the top 5 ministries and the kind of allocations they will perhaps be getting, if indeed this is what the Treasury CS will go with, and if this is what Parliament will rubber stamp. National Treasury will be getting top ministry getting 167.8 billion shillings, beg your pardon. The Ministry of Health coming in second with 121.1 billion shillings. Ministry of Defense, security matters there, 119.8 billion. Water and Sanitation and Irrigation, 78.3 billion, and Ministry of Energy getting 75.4 billion. These are some of the proposals on some of the top 5 ministry allocations in the 2021-2022 budget. Now, to the Big Four agenda, key pillars that are expected to be the hallmarks of President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy and tenure since 2013. Universal healthcare coverage, and of course the Big Four in totality getting 135.3 billion in that proposal. Universal healthcare, 45.6 billion shillings. Manufacturing, 18.5 billion shillings. Food security, 54.2 billion. And affordable housing at 14.9 billion. It would be good to note that these projects have encountered some challenges, especially financially. So it will be good to see if the government will be able to maneuver and deliver some of the promises under the Big Four pillars. Now, on where will the money come from? Of course, you and I will carry a lot of that burden in terms of taxes, various kinds of taxes, and there have been proposals to, relook at some of the bits of laws around taxes, and we're talking about 1.97 trillion expected to finance this particular budget from taxes, and 1.63 trillion from loans and grants. And then it will also be good to note that we're talking about a deficit of about 952 billion, which is as well raising concerns, and Professor Iraki will be talking to us about that. And the major cash cows expected to finance this particular budget, KRA expects to collect 835 billion shillings, and on the value-added tax projections expected at 472.9 billion, and excise taxes projections 241 billion, and of course in line with some of the proposals they made on some of their tax laws to change in a bid to ensure that the government collects more money once again in terms of taxes. Professor, looking at these numbers, a very ambitious budget, and big allocations in some very critical sectors, big four agenda, some top ministries in government. And later on, we will be looking at a recovery process or recovery plan post-COVID-19. What are your initial thoughts on how Ambassador Ukuru has chosen to play the cards with this one?
Good afternoon, Kenyans, or good evening, Kenyans, wherever you are, whether you are in Kenya or abroad. I think I don't envy being in position of the Cabinet Secretary, Ukuru because of two reasons. One, he's presenting a budget amidst COVID-19 when the economy has been going down instead of going up. So what I'm looking for on Thursday is seeing a budget that is going to address recovery. The economy was hitting bottom early this year and last year. So we expect a budget that is going to show Kenyans that things are not that very bad and the economy can recover in the next 1 year or so. But what impresses me about, or what strikes me most about this budget is the size, 3.6 billion, 3.6 trillion. We should not be surprised because every year the budget will always be bigger than the previous year because the economy is growing. If you look at the census last year, or last year but one, the population has gone much bigger than it was 10 years ago. So a bigger population means more demand for goods, more demand for services. And we must remember that the economy is about people, through people, by the people. Substantive issue in this budget, which, in my opinion, is how we are going to collect the money and how we are going to use it.
Right.
Most of the money seems to come from tax. But the Cabinet Secretary is not in a very enviable position because an ordinary Kenyan does not want taxes to go up because he has already been taxed enough by COVID-19. But the government wants money on one side. So it's a very delicate balancing act. How do you get money from people who have lost jobs, people whose businesses have been lost, but at the same time you want money?
Yes.
So it's a very interesting balancing act.
Would you say it's a pro-Mwananchi budget? What is in it for Kenyans?
I think one of the things I'm waiting to see on Thursday is how much will be in that budget for an ordinary person like me and you. I don't want to be political, but I want to find out what in that budget will be there for the hustlers. I remember one of the things I noted seeing in that budget proposal by the parliament was credit guarantee scheme for the SMEs, or small and micro organizations. Remember that 80% of Kenyans work in the informal sector. So any budget we come up with, any policy we come up with, we must always look at this group. And I'm looking forward to what will be there for them. Are we going to have tax exemptions? Are we going to have, for example, fuel prices being reduced? Remember the last 4 or 5 months, the price of petrol has been going up. And petrol is an input to most of the activities the informal sectors involve themselves in. So I want to see whether there will be something for the informal sector, because everybody is feeling the squeeze. Remember during the first lockdown, there was a stimulus package. But during the second lockdown, there was no stimulus package. So the people in the formal sector, the ordinary Mwananchi, is feeling the pain. And we are hoping that when the budget is read on Thursday, there will be something for them.
I like that you've mentioned taxes. Just before we talk about the big four, financing this budget, looking at the tax proposals that have been made therein, we're talking about basic things like bread is going to be taxed, syringes, confectionaries, you mentioned it. You think this is sufficient for KRA to collect as much as they want to?
I don't think KRA will get enough tax revenues from these proposals for a very simple reason, that people don't have enough money to be taxed. If people lose jobs, if people lose their businesses, then you cannot tax them. Unless you look at the colonial method of taxing people's heads, the so-called poll tax or the hard tax. But I don't think that is enough to get enough money to finance the government projects or recurrent expenditure. And that's why you find there's a very big budget deficit that is going to be financed by borrowing. We are going to borrow money from abroad. We are going to borrow money from the local market. So eventually, we must get something to add to our tax revenues. It's not sufficient.
Bringing me back to a question that is now subject of big debate. Is it time we completely shifted our tax policies, completely rethink and revisit what we do now? Because we seem to be using the same tactics and it's not working.
I think if there's an area that needs a lot of innovation in this country, it is our tax system. How do we collect taxes? I've always given this observation, which most people will not agree with me, but my intuition tells me it is correct. Instead of raising taxes, why don't we reduce the tax rate? I have a hunch that if you give Kenyans a tax rate, maybe a VAT rate of 12%, you could probably collect more taxes than when you have 16%. And it's simple logic. If the tax rate is low, there will be higher compliance. And people will spend more money. And if they spend more money, then you have more activities to tax. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one area we can start thinking about. Can we lower the tax rates so that people spend more, consume more, and therefore you raise more taxes through VAT?
Let's talk about the Big Four agenda and generally hallmarks of President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. We are talking about universal healthcare, manufacturing, food security, affordable housing, but also lately we've been seeing a lot of investments around infrastructure, rail, road, you name it. Very big allocations to some of these sectors. Being President Uhuru Kenyatta's last budget, perhaps in office as president. Your thoughts on how these calculations have been done? Will it cement his legacy or just wipe it out altogether?
Somebody said some years ago that a concrete legacy must be in concrete. And you just need to walk outside this building and see the expressway that is moving that is along Mombasa Road, mm-hmm. all the way to Westlands and beyond. And as I passed there this evening, I was surprised to find that it is being built at night. So I think there's a lot of determination to make sure that such projects are finished before President Uhuru's term ends. And I think it is normal for any politician to leave a legacy. President Kenyatta left, not Kenyatta, but President Kibaki left us with Thika Superhighway. Mm-hmm. And I believe President Uhuru would also want to leave us with a concrete legacy like the expressway. But his legacy becomes bigger because he goes beyond hard things to soft things. Right. Like healthcare, which is very soft, which is dear to everybody. Mm-hmm. Food, which is very dear to everybody. The other hard legacy happens to be manufacturing. And I believe that is one sector that every president should focus on going ahead for a very simple reason. If we put a lot of effort on manufacturing and we expand our manufacturing, a lot of other jobs are created. Whether you go to Europe, whether you go to Japan, whether you go to Korea, mm-hmm. manufacturing is the basis of economic growth. Now, if you look at the Kenyan economy in the last few years, we have shifted too much to the service sector. But service sector is not a very good anchor for economic growth. Mm-hmm. So I believe that manufacturing should be emphasized more, but for people to be very good in manufacturing, they must be healthy. That's why we need to look at universal healthcare and we need to look at the food that people eat. All right. But they all act together, not independently. These projects have encountered a lot of challenges in the previous terms, stagnating because of cash crunch, financial distress, really. So then looking at these allocations and this last budget and how they've chosen to make how much money they've chosen to direct to some of these projects, do you think we'll be able to meet the deadlines or keep the promise that we have been unable to over the years? When I look at the media reports, I see a lot of pronouncement like this superhighway behind us here, expressway, will be finished before his term. I saw something else in today's media that the road from Nairobi to Marwa on the junction to Nyeri and Nanyuki should also be finished by the end of the year. So I think there's some determination to finish these projects before his term. The question is not whether they can be finished. The question is whether we have the money. Because if you have the money, you can crash in the program and finish it before time. But there's some creativity coming to these programs. If you look at the superhighway behind us here, the expressway behind here, they're using the private-public partnership. Mm-hmm. So that's one creative way to finish these projects. The other way to do it is to accept that you cannot finish them on time, and whoever will be the next president after 2022 can continue from where the president stopped. Mm-hmm. After all, we are all sure that some of the projects President Uhuru is carrying on are a continuation of what President Kibaki was carrying on. Mm-hmm. And remember that the Big Four agenda is a derivation from Vision 2030, which was a project of President Moi Kibaki. So there's nothing wrong with leaving the next president or whoever is going to be the chief executive to carry on from where you stopped.
Looking at these projects, do you think they will save Kenya from the financial distress that it continues to be in? Is there value for money for Kenyans?
I think, Akisa, that's a very interesting question and very useful question, because what Wanjiko and Kamau and Onyango and Mwekari and Wauda, what they are asking is a very simple question. How do these projects benefit me as an individual? And my argument has always been, if you build roads, if you build railways, if you build ports, and they help the economy become more productive, then everybody will benefit. Now, if you build a railway line from Mombasa to Nairobi, and the people along the railway line benefit, or if you build a road from here to Marwa or Nanyuki and people along the way benefit, business people are able to save money and save time by transporting their goods much faster, then you have no problem with that. So remember also that most of these big projects are long-term in nature. You don't see the benefits immediately. So we have to be patient before we see the end product of these projects. But my hunch tells me that if they are well managed, they improve the productive capacity of this country, and the people at the grassroots are going to benefit. The question has always been, how soon are they going to benefit? Because some people will tell you, I don't have a car. How am I going to benefit from an expressway? But remember, the economy is interconnected. Even if you don't use a car, somebody else uses a car. Even if you don't use a railway line, somebody else uses a railway line. Sometimes goods are transported by water, then railway, then road. So that interconnection means that any part of that transport system that is efficient, the efficiency is shared by all the systems. So I see a lot of benefits in coming up with these big projects, but they should not just be in concrete, they should also be soft, so that people get educated, people get good nutrition, people get good health. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the roads and infrastructure, it's also about our health, our expectations, and so on.
Do you think then, at this point, have we prioritized the critical things that the country needs right now, looking at COVID-19? The president is really juggling a lot of balls from legacy projects, the politics that he has to deal with. COVID-19, that continues to be a very fluid situation. What should we have prioritized in this budget?
In my opinion, one of the things we should have prioritized is COVID-19 vaccination. I was looking at the data of the US, I think, yesterday, and I was finding that more than 40% of the country's population have had the second jab. Here we have very few people who have had the first jab and the second jab. So one of the ways to make the economy recover faster is to make sure that a critical number of people are vaccinated. Because whether you want or not, COVID-19 is a big problem. I was reading in the media today that Uganda is closing schools and other areas. And remember, we do a lot of trade with Uganda. Tanzania also have had their problem with COVID-19. So I think as we think about the budget, as we think about the roads, as we think about the defense, as we think about other key sectors, I think COVID-19 is an area we cannot ignore. And I'm hoping that the government will come up with a concrete program on how to vaccinate as many Kenyans as possible. Because our recovery, to a large extent, depends on COVID-19. Remember, a lot of tourists are not coming here. And tourists are a big earner, a big foreign exchange earner. So if more people are, for example, vaccinated, then you see a lot of tourists coming here. You see more movement from one part of the country and the other. And people are going to start making decisions that they have been postponing on investment and consumption. So to me, that should be our first priority.
What do you think will be President Uhuru Kenyatta's economic legacy when he leaves office next year?
I wonder whether that is an economic or a political question. But I'll probably give you my answer. One of the concerns that I've had on the streets, because as a researcher I hear people talking on the streets, one of the biggest problems that people are having is that in his term, he has accumulated a lot of debt. And the debt has been put into building these legacy projects like infrastructure, railways, roads, and so on. So if these projects are well organized and the common man starts benefiting from them, then his legacy will not be defined in terms of debt, but in terms of improvement in infrastructure. And that's why if I was in his shoes, I would make sure that my big 4 projects succeed so that people remember me for what I did to improve the economy, not the debts that I borrowed.
But that debt continues to be a very big conversation. You've just talked about the deficit, our budget deficit that we are also still going to finance through loans. There's now conversation and suggestions that perhaps we need to increase to bring up our debt ceiling to 9 trillion. What are your thoughts on that?
Remember that there are 2 ways that you can get money to finance the government projects, whether it is a recurrent expenditure or development projects. You can borrow money or you can tax people. As a politician, you don't want to tax people because they will not be very happy. They will not give you votes. But when you borrow money, you can shift that responsibility from one regime to the next. So if the government borrows money now, or if President Uhuru borrows money, his regime borrows money now, whoever becomes the president next year or the year after can be left paying debt. So from a political point of view, debt is a very good way to finance projects because you can shift that responsibility to another person. But if you tax people, they feel it immediately. Yeah. And they can tell you, you're not going to give you votes. But what I would call probably is a balance between the two. Let's not go too deep into debt. Let's not go too deep into taxing. There should be a balance. The other way we can reduce that problem is to live within our means. And very important, everybody's talking about it, let's reduce corruption and waste. Because if we reduce corruption and waste, there's no reason why we should be borrowing so much money or taxing people so high.
The government has been blamed continuously for going for expensive loans, leading to our debt problem that we're currently experiencing. I'm aware the government is in talks with some countries to just try and renegotiate some of the terms of this loan, seeking moratoriums and whatnot. Is it time to change our loan strategy, perhaps go for cheaper ones? What other proposals would you have?
It's interesting because from my research, when you get money from abroad, we borrow money abroad, it's always cheaper than when you borrow it here. And if I look at the proposal in the current budget, the amount of money we are going to borrow abroad to bridge the deficit is much higher than what we are going to borrow from local sources. So I think it is possible to change that borrowing regime. And one way to do that is to borrow more money abroad. Or from abroad. But if you remember, when we tried to do that with Eurobond, there was a lot of controversy. Because there were questions of transparency, that we have borrowed money from abroad, what are we going to do with it? So I believe one way to solve this problem is to borrow more money abroad, because we are going to reduce the crowding out effect. Because when government borrows money from here or from local sources, it denies Wandera, it denies me and him some money that I could have borrowed. And sometimes the private sector is more efficient than the government, so it's always good to make sure that you balance the two. Don't borrow too much from local sources, don't borrow too much from abroad, because you have to think about the exchange risk, because that money is paid in dollars or other currencies. So you have to balance those two. But it's not rocket science to balance that. And remember, as I said earlier, if you borrow money and put it in a good use, it's not a problem.
Have we been able to do that balancing act with borrowing?
I don't think we have done that so far, but it is work in progress. I believe we can improve on what we have done.
Post-COVID recovery process, there are a number of suggestions in that BPS, just looking at monies the government is putting in to ensure that the recovery process during and post-COVID happens. Do you think we're on the right path as far as this is concerned? Will we be able to get back on our feet, so to speak?
I am one of Kenya's most optimistic citizens. If I look at the history of this country, we have overcome bigger challenges than COVID-19. We have gone through a lot of droughts. Kenyans went through World War I, World War II, went through Mau Mau. We overcome all those. We overcame all those, and we're still a nation. So I believe even COVID, we are going to overcome it. But to overcome COVID, as I've said earlier, we need to do what other countries are doing. We vaccinate our citizens. But we also must come up with the policies that favor the people who run this country, the informal sector. That's why on Thursday, as I said earlier, I'm looking forward to finding out what is there for the common mwananchi, what is there for the people who work in the formal sector, Juakari and so on, people who don't have a regular salary, who don't have a pension, people who live from day to mouth, but they are very important in the economy of this country. So I think if the government makes us believe that the future of this country is bright by having very good working environment, very good policies, making sure that the people who produce in this country produce in a very good environment, so that if I want to work at midnight, I should be able to work at midnight, maybe after COVID is over. If people work hard, they should be rewarded. If people are innovative, they should be rewarded for their innovations. So once people realize that working hard is rewarded, we are going to uplift this economy to a higher level.
Way to end it, and a lot of expectations. I'm seeing a lot of comments that I can't quite go through most internet challenge here. But of course, on Thursday, we expect that particular event in Parliament, where Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani will be outlining the budget for the financial year 2021-2022. Interestingly, the last budget for President Uhuru Kenyatta, who will be leaving office perhaps in another 13 months or so. So it will be interesting to see what kind of allocations and what direction the country will be taking in this particular financial year. Professor Iraki, thank you very much for joining us and just helping us unpack some of these issues. And on the legacy, I'll still ask you that question again, and perhaps we'll see how that goes once that has been outlined by the Cabinet Secretary. Thank you for watching us, also staying with me on KTN Prime. I'll be seeing you tomorrow night on the front row from 7:30 to 9 p.m. So do stay tuned for that. I am Akisa Wandera. Our sign language interpreter is Marisha Witi. Have a good night.
This is KTN News.